This is a 2-hour PD from the University of Central Arkansas, and we are recording this session. It'll be available for you later. And so Jessica, if you can get us started.
Sure. So, welcome. We're super glad you decided to join us for some of your summer PD. Today's session is about how we have redesigned an educational technology course to prepare pre-service teachers, and what that looked like when we made this big shift during the pandemic, and how we can carry forward some of the lessons that we've learned in this time of remote learning, increased online learning, and hybrid learning, so that we can kind of bring together the best of our work in person, the best of our work online, to cultivate really engaging and exciting environments for our students. However, we know many of you probably aren't working necessarily with pre-service teachers, and so we also want to frame this as an opportunity to think about some of the activities that you're doing with your K-12 students, the students that you work with, the teachers that you work with in your building, so that you can start a conversation about what does it look like to be really intentional about how you're using technology in your classroom. And so we hope that you're going to be able to find some crossover to your own teaching context. And we're excited to share some examples of our students' work with you today. Hopefully it makes you excited about the next generation of teachers coming out of UCA.
For real. Thank you. So wait, before we introduce ourselves, I love this. We started doing this past year. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do a little check-in. So I really love the blob tree. And I think maybe, Michael, do you have the link handy in the notes to put in the chat for everyone?
Yeah, you may
So
want to use this.
look at if you want to use this with your students, I think this is a really great warm up to just check in and see where everybody is. So in the chat, down on the bottom of your screen, you have a chat box with a little speech bubble. If you'll open the chat and tell us what number you're feeling like today in the chat. What blob are you?
15. That's good. That's me too.
Yeah, that is good.
Michelle Turner. Yes. Not quite 20 today, but I'm definitely 15. 4. Yep, that's good. Looking up.
Yeah. 10. I think I'm feeling like a 10 too, Tracy. That's a good one.
Yep,
Yes.
there's Michelle.
20 on top of the world. I love it. These are so good.
I'm glad no one's saying 14.
Some happy blobs.
14 is to the left. I think that was February.
Yeah, 14 was how we were feeling, like middle of the semester, falling into the void, needing a little break. So I think this is a really fun check-in with your students. I used this with my undergrad and grad students this past semester, and it opened the door for some really important conversations. We would do the blob tree, and then I would put students in breakout rooms so that they could talk about how they were feeling, what was going on, what were the challenges that they were navigating that week, and what were they feeling really excited about. And so I think just even taking 3 or 5 minutes for that social emotional component so that people can just be authentic and share is really helpful, whether we're in person or online. So if you want to use the blob tree, the link is in the chat. I think it's a really helpful little tool to check in with our students.
For real. So who are you?
My name is Jessica Herring-Watson. I'm a clinical instructor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at UCA, and I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Michael Mills. You want to introduce yourself?
And I'm also in the College of Education. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of information about UCA while we're here. This PD is brought to you, of course, by the UCA College of Education. And we wanted to highlight that, we've made a lot of strides in the past few years in developing new curriculum for programs that could lead to additional licensure for you or higher degrees. We're very excited about our focus on digital learning and equity and inclusion. We have a new PhD program that's just starting this fall in equity, change, equity, and inclusion for leaders. And you can focus on community, you can focus on teaching, and you can focus on administration. So any focus that you want in that sense. And we of course have specialist degrees in those areas as well. We have GT certificates and school counseling. But I think many of y'all, I know you might already be at a point where you're not looking for anything, but I encourage you just to at least look to see and reach out to us, because we can answer any questions you have about these programs. Okay, so Jessica entrusted me with adding some graphics to this keynote, and she placed a lot of trust in me. And I had to put in a cassette tape. And for some of y'all may know what this is. Some of you, if you're young, you may not know what this is. This is a cherished possession for many of us, those of us especially who grew up in the 70s and 80s. But one of our most cherished possessions was something called a mixtape. And for those of you who are young, that is called a Spotify playlist in analog form that you cannot change very often unless you have one of those fancy dual cassette things where you tape someone else's mixtape. Well, the thing that we loved about mixtapes was, early on you would record a song from the radio, straight from the radio, a song that you loved, right? I remember my brother was recording Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller, because we weren't going to buy the album. You couldn't do that. So he's recording it. And I remember going into his room while he was recording it, and he was mad at me because I opened the door without knocking. So if you listen to that particular Thriller song, you'll hear him like, "Get out of my room," that sort of thing, right? But as we progressed, we would tape off of other tapes. But the thing is, what we noticed was, you don't just tape any song into a mixtape. It's your favorite songs. You had a specific reason why you picked these songs, right? And certain mixtapes were more important than others, right? Because of the meaning each of the songs had for you. And I thought that was a good segue to what Jessica's going to talk to you regarding. Let's start with the why.
Yeah, so just like Michael described that intentionality of the mixtape, and he was totally aiming at me with that, young people that don't know what a mixtape is. But I'll just tell you, I had some mixtape CDs that were made for me by my now husband. And so I got the mixtape. It was just on a round disc that now, I don't even know if I have anywhere to play it. So similar concept, different form. But that same intentionality that goes into the mixtape is the intentionality that we take into our teaching practice. And so, just like we would pick these perfect, specific songs that all had a meaning for us in a particular season, the same is true of our teaching practice. We pull these pieces of our work together to really build a meaningful experience for the students that we work with. And so, when we talk about the why, we're going to talk about starting with some standards and frameworks that, I guess, to continue the metaphor, we'll call the greatest hits of our work, right? That can provide us with this research-based foundation to then say, okay, we know that this is what is going to be best for kids. We know this is what is going to provide them with a powerful skill set when they leave our classroom in terms of using technology in a way that is responsible and efficient and effective and meaningful for them. Now, how do we pull from the toolkit we already have in terms of our pedagogy and our content knowledge and our technology use to create that environment that's going to support that learning? So we're going to spend some time talking about standards and frameworks. Some may be more familiar to you than others, but I think having them as a foundation can be really helpful as a reflective tool when we're thinking about the best of the best in our practice. We can kind of look at it through the lens of these standards and frameworks when we're thinking about how to pull all of that forward into our classrooms in the fall.
Thank you, Jessica. And if you haven't already noticed, the big focus of this PD is on the intentionality of using technology in education. And we believe that technology use in education is critical. And we'll get into that later, we promise. But we think it's an essential element of making sure that we're inclusive.
Mhm.
Our number one goal for education, trust me, is not to memorize all the capitals of all 50 states or to memorize the quadratic equation. Our number one goal in education is to make sure everyone has an opportunity to learn what they need to be successful. And part of that opportunity is making sure that we do what we can as educators to use every tool that we have, including technology, to make sure that we are being responsive culturally and linguistically. So let me
Mhm.
move on to our standards.
Yeah, so we're going to start this conversation with a little interactive activity. We want to hear from you before we start looking at these standards and frameworks. So you heard us talk about the ISTE standards. ISTE is the International Society for Technology in Education, and they've created a set of 7 standards for both educators and students. So we're going to look at those standards together, but before we do that, we kind of want to get a sense of where everyone is in the audience. So on the next slide, there's a QR code. Grab your phone if you have a smartphone nearby. Open the camera and scan that QR code. It'll open a website. And I'm going to do it too, so we can all participate together. So it'll take you to menti.com. Mentimeter is one of my favorite tools. I know Michael uses it in his courses as well for getting feedback from students. What I really like about it, particularly early in the semester, is that it's anonymous. So students often feel more comfortable really sharing what they're thinking about because they don't have to add their name to it. I use it in all of my courses to set class norms, to ask my students, what are your expectations from this class? What do you want to gain from this? How do you feel about the time that we're spending together, and what's going to make it feel useful for you? All right, so we've got about half of us not familiar with the ISTE standards, somewhat familiar, a few very familiar.
The very familiar, is that me and you?
It might be. So I
No.
would say we're about half and half.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you this too, we're not going to do a deep dive into these standards today. We are going to look at them though, because I think even just looking at the way that they're named, it's pretty intuitive. You can tell what the goal of each of the standards is, and you'll see that in just a moment when we look at them on the screen. All right, let's go to the next question, Michael.
All right.
All right, your answer to this, if you were in that not familiar column, might be I don't. That's totally fine. Maybe you're just curious. You want to learn a little bit more. So let us know, how do you use the ISTE standards in your teaching and learning context, if at all?
That's me, because I know them. And I will tell you, as you're putting things down in this, um, as a classroom teacher, as a support staff, a support educator, um, ISTE standards, as Jessica pointed out, they are very intuitive, and we're going to show you how easy it is for you just to pick one and use it in your practice, just to benefit, to help students in their learning journey.
Lots of interest here. I'm excited about the curiosity we're
Mhm.
seeing.
The fact that we're using Mentimeter to get your feedback and your contribution, that fulfills one of our ISTE standards. You know, things like that. It could be as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Using Zoom to a certain degree, not a deep degree, but it's passable.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go ahead and go to the next one.
All right. Now this
All
one,
right.
everyone should be able to answer.
Yeah. So now that we've gotten a little bit of understanding of where we are with the standards, let's blow it out to a broader picture here. What tech skills do you consider essential for educators? And you can enter more than one answer here. So you can just keep on submitting if you've got multiple words. I should have made this a word cloud in hindsight. Yes, I agree. Curiosity is vital. Willingness to fail and try again. That's a good one. So important to model that for our students too, that stick to itiveness.
You know, that one that says give feedback. Giving feedback is one of the most important things an educator can do for a student. It
Mm-hmm.
has a highest effect size than so many other actions that you can take. Giving feedback is right up there in the top 5. By the way, the number one thing that educators can do to increase student learning is making sure students know that they can learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. These
Flexibility.
are great answers. I love that we're seeing such a broad range. So
Mhm.
definitely we need those basic skills as educators, just functional skills so that we can communicate which is here and navigate through the different resources. I think we saw that need for functional skill this past year when we were having to, it was no longer an option or a luxury to use technology. It was a necessity to reach some of our students. But we're also seeing a lot of maybe what some people would call soft skills, flexibility, open mindedness, willingness to learn. Um, what was some of the other ones I saw out there? Stick to itiveness. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing both, right? The functional skill and the mindsets and dispositions. Yeah, these are great. Okay, Michael, let's do another. Let's go to the last one.
Mm. This is a little harder.
Okay, so yeah, so now we're curious, what technologies or apps do you use to support student-centered or student-driven learning? So many of us use technology for those kind of functional technical things of sending emails, taking attendance, keeping a grade book, looking at data, but what are we having students do with technology in the classroom?
Yeah, one thing, someone just put Google Classroom. One of the pieces regarding Google Classroom is you can make it just a simple shell for including information, just a repository, if you will, or you can make it interactive in the sense, I know Google Slides there is making it interactive is good, but Google Classroom could actually give students kind of a gradual responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that one with clips must be you, Jessica.
Yeah, but Google Slides is great. Flipgrid, one of my
Ooh,
favorites.
Edpuzzle. I
Research
love Edpuzzle.
collaboration. Yeah, I love Edpuzzle too. These are awesome. Video and audio.
Hmm.
Yeah, and whatever your LMS is. So we talked a little bit about Google Classroom, but the same is true for Schoology and for Canvas. In any of those LMSs, it can be very consuming focused, or we can use those spaces to create that consuming, creating balance with our students. So I think it's all in how you use the tool. So we're asking you what, but there's certainly a how component here as well.
You know, I'm seeing a lot of video and audio piece, Flipgrid and that sort of thing. Um, if y'all have noticed, the current generation of learners, especially middle level and around that age, video is so critically important for them. I mean, I guarantee one of our participants, Michelle, could tell us what Jackson Mills does to look up information. It's not Google. He goes straight to YouTube, and that's
Hmm.
how he finds information. That's just all he does, all he knows. Um, but there's a difference between, and Jessica's going to get into more detail about this later. There's a difference between watching, consuming a video, and creating a video, and those two things make a world of difference in education and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your thinking so that we could kind of get a sense of where everyone is at. Hopefully, you can add Mentimeter to your list of tools that you can use with students and teachers as well. Super useful and intuitive, easy to build these slides and get feedback from your audience.
We love it.
So let's look now at the standards. And you were going to talk, right, Michael? Were you going to talk about students, or do you want me to talk about the student
You were going to
standards?
talk about students, and I'm going to talk about educators.
Okay, perfect. So if you look at the ISTE standards for students without even looking at the language from the standards, just looking at how they're titled, I think we can get a sense of some of the skills that this organization is saying are important for students living in an increasingly digital world. So if you would, before we move forward in the chat, I want you to pick one of these and tell me what you think it means. When you see that phrasing or that title, what do you think it means? And I'll give you an example. When I see the term empowered learner, I think of a student who is taking charge in their own learning. They're making decisions about how they show what they know and how they navigate information. So if you would just pick one of them, put the term in the chat, and then tell us, what do you think it means? What does it mean to you when you see that term?
We're not testing you on this, we promise.
Yeah, this is just, what do you think? Because you're probably right. They're pretty intuitive.
Mhm.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, and Paige, I really like the way you worded that. That communication is two-way, right? What we're putting out there, but also what we're taking in.
Oh, George, that's a really good answer.
Mhm. Yeah, Jerry, I like that creative communicator definition. That's great. Yeah, these are awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your thinking. Very cool. Okay, so now that we've kind of got in our minds some ideas about what we think we're looking for, what I'm noticing in the things that you're sharing is that these are all very constructive and active, right? It's about what students are doing in their learning and how that can be used in a real world context. So let's take a look at what the standards look like. Michael's put the link in the chat, and we're going to show you a screenshot of what the website looks like. I would encourage you, if you're interested in these, to really take some time to explore them. You'll notice next to each of the standards, there's a watch playlist button. So ISTE has made little short videos about each of the standards to give you some more information and help you to unpack them. The way that these are structured, there are the 7 core anchor standards for students, and then you'll see there are 7 for educators as well. And then there are 3 or 4 indicators. So you can see we've opened the drop down for the digital citizen indicators on the website. So when you first look at it, it might feel like, oh, that is a lot to unpack. But really, the things that you all shared in the chat are very similar to some of the indicators for the standards. Like I said, I think they are very much intuitive. You all are living in a digital world, and so you know what students are having to navigate on a daily basis. All right, Michael, are we ready for the teacher standards, educator standards?
Mhm. And notice how Jessica modified her language there from teacher to educator, because really the responsibility is anyone who works with kids.
Yes.
And I think in many ways, when we talk about as educators, we think about these different skills and these different topics of how we can develop ourselves so that we can support our students master those standards that Jessica just shared with you. So in other words, in many respects, some of them are very similar, like we need to model what it is to be a digital citizen to teach them digital citizenship, right? But it also means, can you design a lesson that is student-centered, proactive, engaging, and we're gonna go into more detail about that because that's really the meat of all of this. And I think these pieces, we think about these all the time because as educators ourselves, we want to make sure that we can match up to these so we can do our job effectively. And in our class that Jessica referenced at the beginning of this PD, it's our technology integration class. We make a very big point of requiring our students to link the two together. Like, how does an educator standard support the student standard? And for y'all, there's still probably a little, I don't know, hesitation for some of y'all, because if you're thinking, look, I'm not a classroom teacher, so what am I going to use these for? How am I going to implement these? And I took the liberty, this is on the website, and here I'm going to, oh, hold on, let me go back just 1 second so I can get the web link and put it in the chat. This is the one for the educators. If you looked at, for example, standard 3, citizen, right? And I look at, for example, 3C, mentor students in safe, legal, and ethical practices with digital tools and the protection of intellectual rights and property. Simply asking students to cite their work online. That is something that you are doing to support students in that standard. That's something anyone can do, not just classroom teachers. You can always have a good conversation with students about copyright or when they post something online, the knowledge of digital footprints and that sort of thing. So I want to encourage you, as Jessica pointed out, just go through these standards and find one that really matches up to what you think that you can contribute to your students. Jessica, I found some examples from our students of what we had our students do. Would you created this assignment? Would you elaborate?
Yeah, so when our students, so our course, our technology integration course is designed around these standards. So all of the experiences in the course that they complete and work through together are in some way aligned with the standards for educators. And so we start the course by unpacking the standards using sketchnoting as a strategy or a medium for their thinking. I love a sketch note because it is such an easy way to show what you know visually, which is really supportive of all types of learners, particularly our multilingual learners who sometimes need an image to go along with the vocabulary. And so what I also like about doing this, they do this in Keynote, but you could do the same thing with Google Slides, is that they can use clip art and image and in addition to drawing. So I really like the way that the students in some cases have used Apple Pencil because our students are on iPads to actually draw and write on their screen, but some of them felt more comfortable with clip art and text boxes. And so it gives students so many options for showing what they know in a way that feels comfortable so that we can then talk about, okay, you looked at this standard that has this more complicated language. How did you break it down to really make it make sense to you and your teaching practice?
I want to point out one other thing, and all credit goes to Jessica. She designed this assignment, and I took it unashamedly, and I use it every semester because for me, having the students articulate in their own words what these standards mean, and then aligning them from educator to students, that's very valuable. But this sketch note piece to me is critically important because one, not just allowing the creativity of your students, because gosh, who wouldn't rather just do a sketch note than write an essay about the standards, right? Because for us, all that matters is, can you show us what you know about these? Can you
Mhm.
articulate this? We don't need to write an essay or read an essay. We just need to know if you know this. But also, when they create this, they are fulfilling an important principle of universal design for learning, which is so critically important to us in this classroom, in this class, and in education overall. Because if you notice, the images align with the text, and that fulfills those multiple modes of representation that is so important, especially for students who might need that extra help or need that extra scaffolding.
Mhm. Absolutely.
All right, so we wouldn't be college teachers if we didn't have all kinds of models and standards and frameworks and all that stuff. And we're gonna trust that you're gonna stick with us for just a second here, and we promise we're gonna make this good. We promise. All right. So in addition to the standards are one thing, right? But for us, what's really important is, okay, so we got these standards, the important pieces, but how do we translate that into a classroom? How do we make sure that we do these things, right? How do we know that we're doing it right? There is a theoretical model that's really popular in educational technology and teacher education called TPACK. Okay. And essentially in this theory, and I'm going to give it a little piece here, and then I want Jessica to finish up and kind of articulate how we actually put it in the classroom. But generally, the theory goes that there are three types of knowledge that we employ in learning situations. There's the content knowledge, what do you know about math, for example, or Shakespeare, or how to learn how to read, right? It's that content and skills that you just have to know. But then, as many of you who've been to college, you know that you had a lot of professors who knew their stuff, but they didn't necessarily know how to teach it. They just got up there and talked about it and read from notes or read a PowerPoint. And they didn't really have that pedagogical knowledge, right? They didn't really know how to ensure that you're learning the material instead of just hearing the material. So you've got the content skills, you've got the ability to be able to convey that into a learning context, but then also, especially in this digital age that we have, there's a knowledge of how to use technology effectively, right? Not just to watch Netflix or Hulu or something like that, but actually to use technology in learning context. So whenever you combine all three, we're looking for the good Venn diagram. I was not a math teacher, but I love me a Venn diagram, right? And so we look at where everything connects, right, or intersects. So we know that some people are really good. They know a lot about the technology and they know how to communicate to people effectively, but they may not have all the content knowledge, right? And that happens a lot in our schools because principals will hire somebody, for example, to fulfill a content position, and they're learning 2 weeks ahead of the students. And then you also have people like I know some people who really know how to use the technology, and they really know their content, but they do not know how to teach. They don't know how to communicate to people and ensure that students are learning. What many of you probably see a lot of are people who have pedagogical content knowledge. They not only know the content and know how to communicate effectively in learning context, but they may not know how to use all the technology that's available right now, especially productively in a learning context. So, Jessica, could you elaborate further on that?
Yeah. So what the goal is in TPAC, what the theory says we're looking for is to be in the center of these sets of knowledges, right? So to bring together content, pedagogy, and technology to provide a useful and meaningful experience. So as we said, this is a theoretical framework. And so even people who use it in their research say this is really complicated. There's a lot of arrows and a lot of circles. There's a lot going on here. But I do think if we just focus on those three types of knowledge, we can use this as a reflective framework when we're planning and carrying out instruction with students. We can take a moment to think as we're planning, am I sharing the content in a way that is meaningful? Have I chosen an instructional strategy that is most appropriate to how I want to share this content? So I think something interesting that Michael just talked about is those people with um, really strong content and technology knowledge, maybe they're just really, maybe they're great at direct instruction, but they haven't broadened that pedagogical skill set to include other strategies. So, am I matching the strategy to the content, providing that great vehicle? And is the technology intentionally supporting the knowledge that students are trying to gain and the pedagogical strategy that I'm using? Because you've probably all been in a situation where the technology felt like a distraction, right?
Mhm.
And in some ways, as a teacher, that can be a real turnoff. Well, why would I use this if it's just this added thing? And so, as we move into the next slide, you'll see the way in which we choose to use the technology to support the content and the instructional strategy is particularly important. And so, in addition to TPAC, we also want to share with you, and this is a really important practical framework for us, is the triple E model.
Okay, that's the thing. I'm hoping that you're about to share something a lot simpler than TPAC. I love TPAC. I know you love TPAC, but I bet you our people out there are saying, okay, okay, nerds. So please tell me this is more practical and easier to digest.
Absolutely. So the triple E model was developed by Liz Kolb in Michigan. And I really like this framework because it has three pieces, and each of those pieces are driven by reflective questions you can ask yourself about how you're using technology in a lesson. Okay, so we're going to start with engage. Okay, how is the instruction or the use of the technology really engaging students in learning? According to this model, engagement has three pieces: time on task. So is it minimizing distractions and really helping students get into the flow of learning? Is it motivating them to learn? So is it highly engaging and exciting for them? And then does it help students move from passive to active social learners? To me, this is really a key connection to the ISTE standards. Are students being active and social, engaging with one another, or are they just consuming information from you? The second piece of this is, oh,
Hey,
do you want to add something?
if you don't mind, I was
Yeah.
thinking about a teacher friend of mine who used technology. It was ancient technology called a VCR. Um, but it is a perfect example of what you're talking about, right? For example, if I said, okay, in my math class today, I'm going to let students watch the Razorbacks play basketball, right? And if you're just
Hmm.
going to watch a sports game, well, it's engaging, but it doesn't fit the definition of what you told me, time on task, right? So,
Hmm.
we don't let kids just watch movies and sports in school because it's about learning. But this particular teacher, she would let students watch a 10-minute clip, and they had to count rebounds, shots missed, all this stuff. And that's how they calculated percentages and ratios. So,
Cool.
right. So for that, it was very engaging to the students because they had to pay attention and it was something that they enjoyed doing and they were fulfilling time on task on the actual standards. So,
Yeah, love that. So the second piece is, how does the technology enhance the learning? So does it help students have a more sophisticated understanding, or does it scaffold the concepts to make them easier for students to understand? I think this is particularly true of a really good use of video or graphics or animations, because it can help students to make abstract concepts more concrete. And then the big piece here is, does the technology go beyond just substituting a traditional task? Are you doing something that's not possible without the technology? I'll give you an example from a PE classroom because I think that's a content area where often PE teachers may think, I don't know about technology in my gym, but I thought this was super creative. One of our PE candidates did a lesson helping students to perfect the different baseball pitches. And so rather than just have students practice over and over, he had them partner up and they used the slow motion feature on the camera to record the pitches in slow mo. And then they shared the videos and critiqued each other on their form. That's not possible without the use of the technology. And they weren't even using an elaborate app, they were just using a feature that's in the built-in camera on the smartphone. So that would be an example of really enhancing the learning with technology in a way that maybe wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about teaching the different pitching forms. I'm not much for baseball, so I apologize. I said that wrong. Finally, the last piece is extend. How is the technology extending the learning? This really goes back to that creative communicator, global collaborator piece of the ISTE standards. So how is it helping students to develop skills they can use in their everyday lives? This could even be some of those functional technology skills that we know they're going to need in the workplace someday. Problem solving skills, because honestly, we don't even know what technology they may be using in 10 years. But if we can develop those problem solving mindsets, that flexibility, that's a really useful everyday skill. And then finally, how are we creating a bridge of relevance with the use of technology? So a really cool example I saw of this in an elementary classroom is one of my students created a lesson using Google Expeditions, which is an augmented reality or virtual reality app on the computer, to let her students explore the different biospheres around the world. So rather than looking at a page in a textbook and reading about the different biospheres, they could see, what do these different environments look like all over the world? What do you notice about this environment? What do you wonder? And then that served as a launch pad to them doing some research about the different types of environments and ecosystems around the world. So these questions, I think, feel a lot more practical. I can use these almost like a checklist. And in our program, we now require our students to write a technology enhanced lesson plan in this class, and then again as an intern. And so with the permission of Liz Kolb, we've developed a rubric around this to help our students, kind of as a diagnostic tool, to help them really think and reflect on how they're using technology in a meaningful way.
Could I add another example?
Absolutely.
Thank you. These questions were extremely important to me this past semester, for example, and I would encourage you, as Jessica pointed out, is to think about these as a practicing educator, whether you're in the classroom and you're reflecting on your own use of technology, or if you're a supporting educator and you're providing guidance and you're coaching really other educators on, like, for example, if you need students to be more engaged, or they need more authenticity in what they're doing in the classroom. These are really good questions to ask, because a lot of our teacher candidates, and I would wager a lot of teachers, they still don't understand the difference between purposeful technology use and technology use, right? I had a student, she's a wonderful student, great student. She teaches math, and she turned in her rough draft of her technology enhanced lesson plan, which Jessica is going to elaborate on here in a second. And she said, okay, the way I'm going to use technology is I'm going to use Nearpod. Nearpod is this app that lets everyone share the same screen. There's a whiteboard on it, and students can work out their problem. She said, I'm going to give students a math problem, and they're going to work it out on the whiteboard part of that app, and I'm going to show them how it's done. And I said, that's not good. That, and I said it in a nice way, but I said, that is not fulfilling the triple E, is it? But I'm using technology. Yes, you are using technology. That's awesome and everything, but that's just the first little step of it. I said, how are you making it relevant to students? How are you extending their understanding of that math concept? All you're doing is taking the physical whiteboard and moving it over here to an iPad or a Chromebook or whatever.
Mhm.
how are you using that technology in a purposeful way that helps students see beyond the math to something that they can actually use the math for in their real lives?
Mhm.
How does it help them become creators, right? And could you maybe have them create a tutorial video of how they solve the problem, something like that, so that the responsibility is a little bit more in their hands than your own. Where
Mhm.
essentially all this moves that responsibility to the learners instead of the people who already know the stuff. All right. Thank
Yeah,
you for that.
absolutely. Yeah, of course. I think it's good to note too that the teachers was at a great starting place. It was just about extending. So after you do that piece in Nearpod, what are the students going to do next to show
Right.
what they know? Maybe that's your intro, and then we move forward to something more student driven.
Right.
So this is what that rubric looks like. There's some very tiny text on it, so it may be very difficult to read. But what I hope you'll notice is that we've just taken those reflective questions that we just shared with you and we've broken them into some bullet points. So Michael has shared the link to this document in the chat. If this is something of interest to you, maybe you want to share it with other teachers as a thinking tool and a reflection tool, feel free to do that. But it's just three pieces: engaging, enhancing, and extending the learning. So now that we've talked about those different ways that we are framing this course that we're teaching, that we can all frame our thinking about our practice, let's maybe take a 5-minute stretch break and then we'll jump into this next piece. We're going to share some examples of what that looks like and talk about how you could potentially extend those examples into your own teaching context. But it's 10:48 right now. Let's take a little stretch break until 10:55. What do you think, Michael? Perfect. So at 10:55, we'll get started again. If you need to get up, stretch your legs, get another cup of coffee, we'll pause the recording while we're on a break, and then we'll jump back in at 10:55. These kind of foundational ideas, we've talked about how we can be reflective in our practices with technology in our teaching context. We're going to share some ways that we have focused on applying the standards. And so we kind of broke this into three big ideas: grounding concepts. So, what are the really big foundational ideas we want to kind of run through our work with pre service teachers in this course? Building foundational skills. So, as all of you noted, some of you noted in the Mentimeter, we can't have these, it's hard to have these big reflective thinking practices about technology if we don't just have a foundational skill set. And so we also need to build technical skill so that we can use these tools effectively with students and have the confidence to use them with our students. That doesn't mean we need to know every tiny detail of how these tools work, but we do need to have those dispositions and mindsets that you mentioned and some functional skills. And then finally, we can use those grounding concepts and those foundational skills to then design meaningful learning experiences for the students that we're working with. And so we're going to share some examples of ways that we have worked to apply the ISTE standards in these three kind of big buckets of thinking.
And along the lines of our retro themed presentation, we wanted to make sure that we brought in some classic technology.
Yes. I love this so much. All right. So we're going to start with grounding concepts. We talked about the standards and frameworks. Another big piece that's really important to us is digital citizenship. We live in an increasingly digital world. And so if we need to talk about standards and frameworks first. I got ahead of myself, didn't
I'm so
I?
excited.
I am. I love digital citizenship. And then we'll talk too about UDL and accessibility. Michael referenced earlier universal design for learning, and maybe we could put the CAST website link
Mm-hmm.
in the chat for people who are not as familiar with universal design for learning. It's a framework that helps us to think about providing students with means of representation, action and expression, and engagement to really provide a learning experience that benefits every student, regardless of their abilities, right, to access the content. And so we want to think about all of the learners in our care. And I think UDL provides us with some really, really useful ideas for what that looks like, all rooted in neuroscience. So that being said, our first example is those sketch notes that we talked about earlier. So we have our students sketch note the standards. It can feel really overwhelming, I think, to look at all 7 of them at once. And so we give each student one standard. Okay, I only want you to look at learner, or I only want you to look at leader, and just break that one standard apart and show us visually what it means to you. Then we have our students put that sketch note on Padlet, which is basically a digital pin board, right? It's a place where we can curate a lot of different types of resources. What I really love about Padlet is that you can put text-based information there, links to websites, images, audio, basically any file type can be curated to a Padlet page. Another tool that's very similar but is free and not just freemium is Wakelet. You can do similar things with Wakelet. So students post their stuff to the Padlet, and then they can view each other's work and comment and like on each other's work. So building that skill too as a digital citizen and an online collaborator, being able to give one another feedback.
I might add.
Now we can talk about digital citizenship.
Well, I might add one thing that I like about the Padlet assignment is whenever you have teachers who, and for us teacher candidates, who share these resources in a site that they can access later. So whenever they leave the confines of this university or whatever, and they're like, man, I can't really remember what that was about, they can go back to that site at any time and say, oh, yeah, that's right. I remember learning that. Kind of like holding on to a textbook, but not really having to pay for the textbook. Hey,
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jessica, this next example is a video. Do you want to talk about it first, or do you want me to play the video?
Let's play the video first.
Okay, this is the video of a student. Essentially, again, Jessica designed this class, and I go along for the ride, right? But this assignment that she set up was for the digital citizenship piece. The students would do a few exercises, you know, to learn the content. Then they had to post a reflection of what it's like to be a digitally responsible, a good digital citizen. And they post this in Flipgrid and then get feedback from their classmates, from us, the instructors. And I love it because, again, you're not asking students to write out an essay that they otherwise would not. They get to just, in an informal way, share what they know. And that's really what's important to us.
Yes.
Talking about media literacy. Now, before we get into all of that, we're first going to address 2 things. What is a digital dossier and what is a digital citizen? First of all, a digital dossier is every piece of digital information about you since before you were born. So that means anything you posted, anything anyone has posted about you, anyone has tagged you in, anything related to you. Digital footprint is anything that you have posted on your social media account. Then how does that relate to media literacy? Media literacy is the ability to assess, analyze, evaluate, and create news.
I loved how she did all the
to be critical thinkers, effective communicators, and active listeners. 5 things we need to think about when it comes to media literacy is the creative dismissive. What was used to grab your attention? How might someone else understand this message? Why is this message being sent? What point of view does this message represent? We live in an age and time where we are all media consumers. We all have phones, laptops, television, radio, WhatsApp. So we need to find a way to be informed consumers of these different medias and to make sure that we're not just consuming things that are not good for us or not important or posting these things, which is why it is important to be informed. And also we have to be careful of what we post on social media. So you need to think twice before you post that rant about the kids in your class, or before you tweet about why you don't like your teacher, or before you post anything, pictures you post, you need to think, will this look good about, will this say something good about my personality in the next 10, 15 years? Because trust me, you might think it's gone away, but it is still there. So just be careful, think safe.
So you can probably tell why she's one of my star students. She's
Hmm.
so good at explaining what it is to be a good digital citizenship perspective to social media in this sense.
Hmm.
What I particularly liked about this assignment setup was having it having the student create a video and not telling them any particular things like how to be creative or whatever. I get to see from their perspective what it is to be creative, to articulate, and I can give them feedback because I can always say, look, you just talked to me without really sharing how important this was or that was. It gives me an opportunity to have a conversation with the student about what they know and what they don't know. And for this one, especially for us with teacher candidates, it gives me a sense of how they communicate. And that way I
Hmm.
can give them that extra feedback, not even related to the specific content that I asked her to talk about. I can go in and say, I really liked how you did this. Keep doing that. And think about when our students in the classroom, if they just get, I mean, how many of you really, like whenever you wrote an essay, and I'm not picking on Jessica or me here, we're both former high school English teachers, and we assigned some essays in our time. But in many respects, we knew colleagues who would assign an essay, you get a grade on the essay, and that was it. There's no real feedback, no chance to modify it, no chance to elaborate on it. And some students would actually just write, what I call BS, beautiful sunset, right? And, and they really didn't answer the question, but they kind of skirted around it. But whenever we ask for videos, it gives the students a chance to be creative, but also gives me a chance to really assess how well do you really know this information.
Yeah, I really like the synthesis piece here. Students get a lot of information about the topic of digital citizenship. And then this assignment is framed as a public service announcement. So we ask them to really be intentional about choosing an audience. And so in this example, you can see she's speaking to her peers, to other future teachers, when she says, think about what you're going to put out there before you do it, right? As a teacher, as a college student pursuing education. Then she also thinks about her future students and gives them some information about what they should consider when they're thinking about what they're going to create and post online. So I really like that intentional choice of picking an audience. I know we teach students that want to teach all different grade levels. And so it's interesting when we're looking at these assignments to see the information that is selected as most important for our middle level and secondary majors versus the information that candidates choose as most important for first, second, and third grade students. And then how they design their video to be appealing to that audience. So in this example, I love that she's kind of like hearkening to TikTok with the pointing at the different pieces of text. So really thinking about her audience, what kind of video are they consuming in their everyday life, and how can she appeal to them by using similar design features in her own work.
Mm-hmm. And I
All
got to tell
right.
you, students love this assignment. They really give it their all.
Yeah, it's fun. So when we talk about universal design for learning, we want our students to think about how they can take the UDL framework, and Michael has just linked to the guidelines in the chat. Basically, there are a series of checkpoints and guidelines that provide teachers with concrete, or all educators, with concrete ways that they can make information more accessible to students. Whether that be the way that they are representing the material for students, providing them with that information, how they're asking students to show what they know, so means of action and expression, and then how they're really working to actively engage their students in learning. And so we, again, use Padlet to have students do a little inquiry activity. They go look at the frameworks, they work with a small group or a partner to identify concrete ways that they can use technology to meet that particular UDL checkpoint. And so then again, that creates this library of resources that students can access when they start designing instruction and lesson planning with technology as a key part of their lesson. Did you want to add anything here, Michael?
I will say, some of you, if you're not familiar with UDL, it essentially started off as a way to make mainstream classrooms accessible for students with learning needs, especially those with learning disabilities and what have you, or visual impairment, hearing impairment. It's essentially a way to make all learning accessible to everyone. And y'all actually see these UDL principles played out in outside of education too, like when you go into Kroger or Target or whatever, and when you go up to the door opens for you. There's a little ramp or something that is designed for people who cannot open a door physically, right? But it benefits everyone, because if you're holding a lot of bags, or if you're trying to put your keys in your purse or whatever, essentially we look at UDL as it's going to be essential for some of our students. And if it's essential, then you got to do it. You got to do it, because if we're talking about being inclusive, there are no exceptions. We include all students in our education, in our learning. So we have to integrate UDL principles into our educational activities, our learning classrooms, what have you. But what we've noticed is what's essential for some students is actually, it's beneficial to everybody. I mean, I love the doors at Target. I love being able to just walk in, right? I love whenever someone has big text that I can read, or contrasting colors so it's not hard to read, right? I love whenever I see, for example, I don't know how many of y'all watch, like, we haven't watched a TV show without captions in the longest time. We have captions on all the time, and it started watching British shows because it's hard to understand a lot of their slang and their dialect. But we've noticed, heck, we went to go see In the Heights the other day, and I was like, man, I kind of wish they had captions in the movie theater. I know that might bother some people, but the point is, we don't need them, but it makes it much better. So for us, it's critically important that we integrate these principles. And technology, we've noticed, make integrating UDL so much that easier.
Yes, absolutely. So when we come to applying the standards and building foundational skills, this is a really good opportunity to access self-directed online learning for all educators, regardless of how many years you've been in the profession and what your context is. And so one way that we encourage our students to engage in self-directed learning is by doing some digital badging programs. So all of our candidates earn their Apple Teacher badge, their Apple Teacher credential as they move through the course. As they're earning those badges, those little micro credentials online to get their Apple Teacher certificate, they're learning about how to use the different core apps on their iPads specific to teaching. So not just what are the functional aspects of this tool, but how do I apply it to teaching? They also go through the Google Certified Educator 1 Foundations training online. Again, not just looking at how do I use the Google Suite in general, but how do I use the Google Suite as an educator? And so having to work through that on their own helps to build some of that self-direction and self-motivation that's so important in learning. But it also helps them to build those foundational skills at their own pace as they're moving through the course.
There's another activity we do. I love these because we set them out and it helps the students become independent learners, right? And take initiative and work without us micromanaging every aspect of their learning. But we also give them a chance to share what they've learned with their class through what do we call it?
App share speed round.
Yeah.
So students can create an infographic like the one you see on the screen for Flipgrid. They have to include on their infographic specific information in their digital poster. So is this app free or paid? How much does it cost? What platforms can you use it on? And then why would you use it to support learning in your classroom? And then students come to class and they have 2 minutes to pitch their app to the rest of the class to get them really excited about the tool and to share how they would use it in their future classroom. And so students really enjoy creating these infographics. And then I always turn them into a digital book or a combined PDF and share it with students so they go into their future classrooms with a collection of tools to reference for their own use with their future students.
One side benefit of this assignment that I've noticed is it's not just a chance for them to explore an app or technology more in detail for their own class. I've had to share with them, like, look, you have to find something that's not just something that you can use, but your peers can use. So you have to be very thoughtful about how
Mm-hmm.
it translates, right? And so what's really funny is I'll have the students like, well, how do I know what they need? I'm like, how would I know what someone else needs? So you want me to ask them? That would be a great way to collaborate. Yes, but
Yeah.
so the technology for me, this assignment based in technology actually creates an opportunity for them to collaborate. And in this sense, without technology, just to collaborate. So I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
technology in that way, is very useful.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm not going to show the video yet. I want you to talk about this if you don't mind, and then I'll play the video.
Sure. Okay, so the capstone kind of assignment in this course is a technology enhanced lesson plan. We chose this assignment for a couple of reasons in this course. One is that students need as much, because you were a new teacher once, that our candidates need as much practice planning instruction as possible. It's a complicated process and it just requires a lot of thinking and reflection. But we also chose it because I think, and I hope Michael agrees, this is a way for students to apply all of those skills that they've been gaining as they're moving through the course. How do I use my functional technical skills to build experiences for my students? How do I use what I've learned about student-centered pedagogies to create an experience for my students? So it's really giving them an opportunity to bring it all together, to create something that they could use in their own future classroom and or use in the field. Many of our students take this right before they start student teaching. So they apply all those skills, they create a lesson plan, then they share that lesson plan with their peers on Flipgrid. So rather than them posting the document and getting written feedback, we ask them to provide a short summary of their lesson and then share about their experience of creating the lesson. What felt challenging? What were they excited about? And then they get feedback from their classmates about their idea. So that's what this video is. This is an example of a reflection on that lesson planning process and the challenges of being really intentional about the use of technology.
My lesson focused on retelling stories using key details, and so after reading the story of Elmer by David McKee to the class and whole group, I would split them up into small groups where they would make a Flipgrid and all collaborate and talk about at least one key detail that they noticed. And then they would be put into independent practice where they would all make keynote presentations where each slide was a key detail in the story of Elmer. And so they would use the text box to say what the key detail is, and then they could use the icon feature or the draw feature to illustrate what is going on in that key detail. And I thought that this engaged all three learners when you use Flipgrid and Keynote together. I thought it would engage visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. And then I thought it enhanced the lesson because using Flipgrid allows students to view other groups' Flipgrids multiple times rather than just viewing it once if the students were going to work as a group and then present in front of the class. And then it extends the learning because it helps students work on collaboration, and then it works on the ability to express your thoughts orally. And I would say the hardest part was thinking about the enhancement and what technology I could use that would be better than not using technology. But I think that the use of Flipgrid and Keynote, especially in this lesson, definitely enhanced it. So while it was the hardest part to think about, I think that the inclusion of both was what was best for the lesson.
So this is another student who does a really good job. Special education teacher, by the way, about to start his internship, and the thought of having someone in special ed using technology in a purposeful way really gets me excited.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked about, again, the use of video for this was being able to hear kind of an informal explanation of how he's going to, like, it's like you're hearing the journey of being purposeful. Instead of this is what I did, it's here's kind of my thinking process as I came to the ultimate conclusion. And it also gave me an opportunity to give him feedback on, hey, I noticed that you got excited about how this stuff is being used and everything, but I noticed that you referenced three things, I guess, learning styles, I guess you'd want to call them. And I got to correct him on how that's a neuromyth and that's not accurate. And he totally understood that. And I said, what you're really looking for is the term multimodal. And that's a good takeaway for all of y'all, is that when we talk about having students create, or when we teach, if you look at the UDL principles, you're looking at the requirement to be multimodal. You share in many different ways, because not everybody, it's not that people don't learn in different ways, it's that we pay attention in different ways, and that we sustain that attention enough to really then learn the material, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Another thing I really like in his reflection is that you hear him work through that reflective framework of engaging, enhancing, and extending. So he spoke to each of those pieces of the Triple E model that we talked about earlier. And then he was really, I think, very honest about what felt challenging to him. And I think his challenge, how do I use this technology in a way that really does improve things, that isn't just an add-on? I feel like that speaks to the challenge that so many teachers feel, regardless of years of experience, about using technology in a meaningful way. And so all of our candidates post these videos, and then they get feedback from their classmates. And it's really interesting to hear the interchange between each of them as they're talking about their experience with this lesson planning.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a phone call. I never answer this phone. They should know that. And I don't know how to hang up without picking up and hanging up. So we're just going to dance to it a little bit.
Perfect.
Our next piece, breakout.
Okay, so we want to give you some time to talk about what you're hearing. So, Michael, do you have the breakout room feature on your end as the host?
It's
Perfect.
ready to go.
Love it. So we've got, I think, maybe 16 of you in the session. So let's do 4 groups of 4.
That's about what I got.
Perfect. So in the breakout room, we want to give you some time to just chat about what you heard this morning and what's really resonating with you. How do you feel like you can apply this learning in your own teaching context, your educational context? What's something new that you hadn't thought about? Maybe what's something that you're rethinking in your own practice. So this is just an opportunity for you to unmute and chat and feel like you have a little time for interaction. And then when we all come back together, we'll share out some of those reflections in the whole group. So let's say 10 minutes. It's 11:22. So we'll send you out into breakout rooms and we'll bring you back around 11:33 or so.
I'm going to move just a few people around because we had a couple of people who came in a little later, but we're good. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so what time did you say?
We'll say at 11:32, we'll come back together.
Okay. All right.
All right.
What's the prompt again? I'm sorry.
What is resonating with you? What's something new you learned? Maybe what's something you're rethinking?
Okay. All right. I'm here. I'm just eating an apple.
Will you pause the recording while everyone's in breakout rooms?
In here.
We got it.
Perfect. Hopefully you were able to have some productive discussion with your small
You went out
in a
just.
virtual world. So we are going to take, oh no.
We can hear you now.
Oh, good. Sorry, my AirPods died, so I had just a little moment of lag while my audio switched over. Wouldn't be a Zoom session if there weren't a technical difficulty. All right, so hopefully you were able to have some productive discussion in your breakout room. We are going to give you the gift of time today and give you a little bit of this session time back as we wrap things up. So Michael, if you'll move it to the next screen. We're going to use a little closing protocol that I really love. I use this with my students at the end of every class session. So if you would take a minute in the chat to tell us, you can choose any one of these that you want to respond to. After our time together today, what are your takeaways? You can respond to, I liked, I'll try, I learned, I wonder. You can pick any combination of those that is feeling right to you and tell us what you're taking away from our time together.
You can share on camera, microphone, or in the chat, whatever is convenient for you right now.
Yes, whatever feels comfortable. If you're not feeling like typing, feel free to unmute and tell us your feelings and thoughts. Oh, great, Brittany. I'm glad. I love Mentimeter, so I'm glad that tool stood out to you as useful. It's great. Another one that's great either in person or online. So I like a tool that translates across environments.
The blob.
Yeah, I love the blob tree. I hope that's something you feel like you can carry forward. Great little check-in tool.
Well, there's something to that of knowing where your people are, instead of just jumping in.
Yeah, learning about the technology standards. Yeah, Kate, that is so great. Having that opportunity to think, how could my classroom look if I use these as a guide for myself in my own practice? I love that. Thank you for sharing.
I will say all of these are good suggestions, but the most beautifully written one is, I like Menti too. I've never used it before, but can see students loving it. That to me speaks to my heart.
For anyone in this session who doesn't know, Michelle Mills is Michael Mills' wife. So some real brownie points being earned this morning.
I just speak the truth.
Yes, absolutely. Jerry, glad to know you found some great tools you can use. Paige, I love the blob tree too.
Starlee, the intentionality that you're referencing, Jessica referenced it at the beginning of this PD, that is the key. That's the biggest takeaway I can say.
Yep, talking about those different components of the ISTE standards and keeping those in mind. Yeah, these are great. Thank you for sharing your thinking with us, y'all.
And I'll tell you that Menti is kind of like an alternative to Kahoot. Kahoot is much more like a gameplay kind of stuff. Menti to me is audience participation and interaction. Love it.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great, George. Yeah, using that triple E as a reflective tool, making sure it's worth that time. I think that's really important to keep in mind. It's not just what tools we use, it's how we use them that counts, right? So that goes back to that intentional practice, really making sure it's worth the time and effort of teaching students to use the tool. Is it really going to impact learning in a meaningful way? So thank you for sharing your thinking. All right, these are wonderful takeaways. Do you want to move us forward, Michael?
Yes.
Thank you for learning with us today. Our names again are on the slide. If you want to reach out to us, our Twitter handles are there as well. If you use Twitter for a PD tool or for education, you can feel free to connect with us there as well. I'm always excited to hear from people that we meet in these sessions if they ever reach out and have questions or just want to talk about how they're using technology in their classroom.
Well, I'd like to, I don't want to speak for you, Jessica, but I know you're always very supportive. I would say if you later are planning for your year and you're curious about, just brainstorming some ideas, I know I'll be more than happy to get an email from you or something just to give you some ideas. Would love to help.
Absolutely. We are here to be a resource and a collaborator to all the teachers. That's how I view my role. I love getting to work with different people that work in different educational contexts all the time. It's super fun.
Mm-hmm. And I want to remind everyone again, if you are looking for additional certifications or to advance your degree, we have a lot of options here at UCA, and everything from GT to dyslexia endorsements to teaching in the digital age to leadership and administration. It seems like there are a lot of programs because we do have a lot of programs, and we want to make sure that we can tailor something for you. So just reach out to us. You can see the websites there. You can take a screenshot of that. You can find, I guarantee you can find our emails on online on the web, but I'll go ahead and put mine here. So if you have any questions, I'm really happy to share anything that I can. And thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. So with that, hey, we want to give back because we love you so much.
20 minutes of summer. Have a great week.
Bye, y'all. Thanks, y'all.
Everyone.
Okay, so.
Stop the recording, Michael.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.